Even out there in YouTube land, Dan here from GeekCast Radio doing another Marvel Fresh Start review as I go through all the Marvel Fresh Start books, and this time around I'll be looking at The Life of Captain Marvel #1. And when I go through these books, I try to answer two key questions. Number one, is it any good? And number two, is it in fact a fresh start? This is written by Margaret Stoll and art by Carlos Pachinko, although there is also another artist who does the flashback stories. And when I talked about this book before I read it in my comic book haul video, I mentioned how Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, is one of those characters that Marvel has been for many years just trying to figure out. She's had a lot of series, she's had a lot of great starts. Even Margaret Stoll, who's been writing the character, recently there was the Captain Marvel book where we saw Captain Marvel in space with Alpha Flight. It was a lot of fun. It was a good start of a book, but that eventually got derailed because then Civil War II happened and ended up kind of really ruining her as a character. And they've been trying to figure out what exactly they can do with Captain Marvel. How can they make her into their big female superhero? Because DC obviously has Wonder Woman. Marvel has Captain Marvel. She has a lot of great potential, but when it comes to just the popularity in the book, it hasn't happened yet. But with the movie coming out, it seems like the perfect time to try to re-act her story and figure out how exactly they can approach it. And I thought this is doing some interesting things that I'm enjoying. I don't think it's all working quite yet, but when you have a character and you have a hero and you're trying to figure out, okay, how can we make this character work? How can we give them a better foundation, a more relatable foundation? Figure out what drives them more. What do you do? And when it comes to heroes, what drives heroes? The answer is tragedy. So what do? They kind of get into her backstory, into her childhood, and we see that within this right away, she's not right. She's seeing these flashbacks to her childhood, and at first they seem happy, just playing around with her family and her friends, but things take a turn for the worse, and we see that there is this relationship between her father and her father and her family, intercut between present day, where it's still is coming up and now it's haunting her. She's becoming violent as she's thinking back to these memories, and she's seeing her father, who was basically abusive to her family, and the aspects that she maybe kept hidden for themselves, or I personally don't know. I've not read every Captain Marvel book, so I don't know if this is something they've touched upon previously. I know Carol Danvers has had issues with alcoholism and things of that nature, but this is, I think, certainly making it much more on the forefront than it has been in recent memory. And she is off, and the other Avengers can tell, and she's being super violent, kind of causing a lot of pain, going to where she shouldn't be. And the other Avengers are like, you gotta kind of calm things down. You have to figure out what's going on. You can't be doing this. You're a hero. But let's see what's going on. And what I love about this, and one of the things that I think is not utilized enough, is her relationship with Tony Stark in comics, because they both come from similar backgrounds, in the sense of, we know that they have challenging families and they both have addiction issues. And the only really good issue of Civil War II, and I think it was not even in the main book, I think it was a side book, I think it was part of Carol Danvers' series, was when she, I think, reached out to Tony Stark, and they were in an AA class, and then they kind of took a break from the craziness of Civil War, and it was like a middle ground that they were able to agree on, because they are sponsors of one another, and they're able to kind of have a conversation like that other characters, that they can't with other characters. They can't really have that conversation with Steve Rogers, Captain America. He doesn't really know where that's coming from. He can give advice, give his opinion, but it's not something that he's ever dealt with. But talking to someone else someone who's gone through the same struggles, there's a lot there that you can relate to. And what's interesting about this conversation, and I'm not going to go word for word with it, but it's how blunt Tony Stark is. He's even calling her, stop being an idiot, stop, not letting her pity herself, which this could have been. This could have been just a pity party, or hammering home hard on that tragedy, as I mentioned, and by every means, growing up in an abusive household, that will do it. But I think it adds a lot more nuance and complexity throughout the book. Some of it, like I said, works. Some of it, it seems a little odd, especially with how it ends. But which I won't give fully away. But again, a lot of this conversation, I thought up front, was a good way of just kind of breaking down Carol Danvers to who she is as a character, which I think is what this comic needs to do first. And what's interesting about this issue is that, you see this, this cover, and knowing this is the first issue of a major series, for a fresh start, you're thinking, okay, let's go into it with a lot of vigor, huge action set pieces, a lot of fun, excitement, big events, and that's been kind of the norm for Marvel as of late. A lot of big things, a lot of big ideas, from Venom to Ghost Rider in space to Iron Man in his first book was fighting Fin Fan Foom. So Carol Danvers, being a Kree, a cosmic huge being, she's got to be fighting something huge. What is who is her arch nemesis? And it's more interpersonal demons. There's you have the bit of action in the beginning, and then it's really more of a family dynamic after that. So I could see for many that may not be the kind of comic you want to read. Personally, I think it, as someone who wants to see them grow the character of Carol Danvers into something much more, dynamic, and give her a story that you can really grab onto. Her Uncle Ben story that makes Spider-Man into such a great character. It's a good place to start. Maybe a little bit more balanced for a first issue, but it does lay the groundwork. And the one issue I did have was when what she ends up doing is flying back to her hometown. And what's great about her hometown is that they have all this pride in the fact that they're home of Captain Marvel. There was an official donut of her that she probably never even tried before, but she's not been home in years, and her family still feels very distant. And what's weird is reading this comic, the show that kind of came to my mind was This Is Us, which is not a show I watch a lot, but it's just how like in that show, how a father figure or a family member, the tragedy or their life can really impact people in different ways, and how just distant families can become as they grow older. Because she comes back home, and at first they're pretty cordial with one another, her and her brother. But and there's actually a sequence with them like playing basketball. And I would say that was the one sequence that just it felt odd here, because their dialogue back and forth, it didn't seem like that doesn't seem, it was like they were playing horse, and like you're an H, that what she kept trying to call him. I like that he let her, like you could see her and how she, where she is in her life, and where she can see her brother and how she interacts and with that. But just their dialogue back and forth felt a little stiff to me. But I think the concept of it was effective, because you see her basically, she is an Avenger. She is, has the power of Captain Marvel. She is, basically can lift mountains, and they're playing horse. Of course she's gonna win, but she kind of sees where she kind of lets him in a way. But their back and forth, their dynamic kind of adjust moving forward, and there is still some resentment towards her because she's kind of kept distant from that family for such a long time. And it makes sense, because she has such a disdain for her father and what he did, where you see that her brother doesn't feel the same way. Like there's that line of "he's still your father," and I think that's very true to life, where even family members or parents that can be abusive, some siblings, at times they still feel a certain kinship or responsibility to that person, even if they're not the perfect father or perfect mother. And how sometimes it can cause rift between family members, and where that leads to. I do think the one piece that didn't really work for me, and it's the end of the book, so I'm not going to give it away. I just give you the overall gist of it, and it's still early, so it may change, but it goes from this general family dynamic and family dilemma to huge science fiction twist. There's like two big revelations at the end. The first one I thought was okay, but I'm saying it's necessarily good or bad, but it seems to this is a book that was doing really well in the sense of adding a level of realism, kind of approaching it from this level, and then to make it swish out on dime to like, oh, actually there's this cosmic huge thing, science fiction aspect of it that's also going to be introduced probably more in next issue. I was like, I don't know if I needed that, and I don't know if it ends up kind of taking away what this book could be. Again, that's only speculation, because I really don't know exactly what I was seeing or what exactly was happening, which was partially purposeful. But I don't know if that. I guess I could rather read a piece regarding the family dynamic, and maybe for many that wouldn't work. They're like, I don't want to read a superhero book about family members not agreeing with one another, and But ultimately, when I look at the idea of this being a fresh start, For me, I think it is pretty well. Even though this is a writer who's been on this character for some time, similar to Ta-Nehisi Coates on Black Panther, there's still a much different approach to it. So I've not been keeping up with Captain Marvel, so I don't know, for example, if there are pieces of this that tie in. Like I mentioned, there are elements of the fact that her and her relationship with Tony Stark. I was ecstatic that they seem to have kind of moved past whatever happened in Civil War II. Thank goodness, because that was still kind of coming up in Avengers. It seems like this is taking place much further than the world of Avengers, because the Avengers team is fully formed in this. So those that are like, where does it take place timeline wise? I'm guessing that's the case of where it's going. But I don't think necessarily, like, if you've never read a Captain Marvel book and you pick this up and you're like, okay, where am I going to get everything I need to get? Does this feel like it's different than the previous series? From what I read, yes, because that was the opposite of this. That was sci-fi adventure in space. This is family dilemma in New England. So it's two very different things, and it's interesting because we have now Black Panther going off into space, doing these space adventures, who's usually earthbound character, and now Carol Danvers, who's literally gets her powers from a Kree, an alien, is now in Earth, kind of more low key. So it's interesting how they're kind of approaching these things. And now Doctor Strange is in space too, so I get, maybe they're like, okay, well, we have all these space characters, let's have someone down to Earth. And I think it's a good way to approach this character. I don't know if this is going to tie into whatever the movie will be next year, but I could see it doing that, because like I mentioned, having some sort of tragedy is what tends to make heroes. Like almost every major hero has that bit of tragedy that they've kind of turned into something else to become a hero, or sometimes they've turned into something else to become a villain. Like, it's not unheard of for them to do things like this. Like Bruce Banner, they later added in the fact that he was also a victim of abuse. Magneto wasn't always the survivor of the Holocaust. That was added later as going along to kind of further their story. So for those that are like, well, this is changing continuity, it's there's precedent for this from happening in past comics. So I think it's certainly a good start. Not all of it works super well. Like I mentioned, some of the back and forth with the family, their interactions were a little off to me, and I'm not a little concerned about where the last piece of this book is headed. But ultimately, like with many of these fresh start books, I think they've ranged from pretty good to great. This to me is more in the pretty good with potential, but some things I'm a little concerned about. So I don't necessarily, this is a book you have to go out and get. The art to me was fine. I thought what they did really well with the art was finding two styles that fit together really well to represent the past and the present. With them intercutting worked really well. I kind of wish there was more of that, in a way that we get that up front, and we don't get more of that as it goes on. And I think that it's not a book that I read and it's one that, like, the art is the reason you're reading it. It's effective. It does what it needs to. It's expression, especially for a book that is so much based upon emotion and dialogue. It does the job when it needs to. But maybe in future issues where it's more of a visual story, it'll take place more. But yeah, so ultimately a pass with some speculation about where this is going next. But if you're someone who's never read a Captain Marvel book or never had any interest, this might change that. Maybe give it a shot. It's not gonna, it's not groundbreaking by any means, but hard for books to be. But overall, pretty good start. So if you want to hear more from me, or if you've read this book, let me know about your comments by commenting below. You can check out my podcast, Comic Concierge, which hopefully will have new episodes out soon. You can also check GeekCast Radio, check our YouTube page. We have tons of content. We're usually dropping either a podcast or video a day. So if you need something to do, we're there for you, from tech to cartoons to comics to movies. We run the gamut. So alrighty, well, just remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.